From the first second, you could feel that this would not be a common interview. The studio was packed, the audience attentive, and the cameras captured each expression. Carrie Underwood, star of country music, sat on the Melanie Hayes program couch with a quiet smile, but the presenter's eyeshine made it clear she had a plan, and Carrie, barely she knew, was about to be put to the test. But what if, in the middle of a live interview, does anyone try to put you against the wall? How would you react if your reputation were at stake in front of millions of viewers? For some, the fear of making the answer would be paralyzing. For others, the perfect opportunity to show who they really are. What happened that night proved that Carrie belonged to the second group. The interview started with a friendly tone. Questions about your tour, the new album, your routine as a mother. But Melanie was not known for keeping light conversations. In a short time, the approach has changed. Carrie, you have always been very open about your values and beliefs, but don't you think that, in such a divided world, can this be dangerous? Asked Melanie, leaning slightly forward, like a hunter who feels the right time to attack. The question carried a clear weight, a trial disguised as curiosity. The audience arrested the breath. Carrie smiled lightly and answered calmly, I believe everyone has the right to express themselves. As an artist, my mission is to share my truth, not impose anything on anyone. A slight murmur traced the audience, but Melanie didn't seem satisfied. Still, by sharing your truth, you don't fear away fans who may not agree with you. After all, wouldn't it be easier just avoid the subject? Carrie tilted her head slightly, her straight and firm look. My fans know who I am. They have been with me for years precisely because they value my honesty. I respect them enough to trust that they make their own decisions, just as I make mine. The answer made some in the audience applaud, but Melanie just smiled, as if waiting for that moment. But when does your truth not align with what is considered progress? Don't you worry about looking outdated? The air in the studio was heavy. It was the question Melanie wanted to ask from the beginning. It was the moment when she expected Carrie to hesitate, but instead, Carrie just took a deep breath, relaxed her shoulders, and with a straight look at the presenter, said something no one expected. The silence in the studio was almost palpable. Carrie Underwood faced Melanie Hayes without looking away, as if she was evaluating the true intention behind that question. Exceeded? She repeated, as one who saves the word before returning it to the table. The presenter kept her sharp smile, but there was an obvious expectation. She hoped Carrie would retreat, justify or lose in a vague response. But instead, the singer leaned slightly forward and, with a calm and controlled tone, replied, I find it curious how some people confuse conviction with delay. For me, having values such as respect, kindness, and faith is not about being outdated. It's about knowing where I am established. The studio exploded in applause. The previously hesitant audience was now clearly on Carrie's side. Melanie blinked a few times, surprised by the turnaround. This was not the script she had imagined, but Carrie was not over. She took advantage of the moment and continued, We are so used to trying to fit everyone into a single narrative that we forget that true progress is not about all thinking the same, but about learning to respect differences. The presenter tried to interrupt, but Carrie raised her hand educatedly, resuming the word. The real question here is not whether my beliefs are outdated, but since when having convictions has become unacceptable. More applause. Some spectators even got up, excited about the firm and elegant answer. Melanie squeezed her lips, realizing that she had lost control of the interview. Breathing deep, the presenter smiled, contained in a contained way, and tried to soften the situation. Well, Carrie, you certainly know how to position yourself. The singer gave a little smile. I believe we should all know. The tension in the studio decreased, but the impact of Carrie's response had already been felt. And outside, while millions watched that moment, something unexpected was about to happen. The interview would become a viral phenomenon. Behind the scenes, the producers of the program exchanged frantic looks. They knew they were witnessing something rare, an authentic moment that escaped the presenter's control and took their own life. In the studio, Melanie Hayes, usually relentless, seemed momentarily speechless. She quickly flipped her notes, trying to recover control of the interview, but it was too late. Carrie Underwood had not only answered, she had turned the game. The applause continued to echo, and Melanie, realizing that he needed to end that clash without looking defeated, forced a smile. Well, Carrie, you definitely brought an interesting point. I'm sure this conversation will continue beyond this studio. Carrie smiled politely. I hope so. We need to learn to talk without trying to shut up. It was the final blow. Simple, powerful, and direct. As soon as the program went to the commercials, Carrie got up, greeted Melanie with a cordial hand grip, and left the stage with the same tranquility she entered. But outside the world was already on fire. In the following minutes, the cell phones began to vibrate non-stop. Carrie Underwood's name fired on Twitter's most talked-about subjects, and the clash videos began to spread at absurd speed. Hashtags, as Carrie answered, Authenticity Varish and Firmscom Grasser began to emerge, accompanied by thousands of comments. Carrie Underwood gave a posture and respect class. That is to be authentic. The presenter tried to corner Carrie, but she responded with class and intelligence. What time? Regardless of agreeing with her or not, there is no way not to admire how she dealt with it. News channels, bloggers, and even other artists have started sharing the moment. The video was on all platforms, and the numbers climbed non-stop. Meanwhile, across the city, Melanie Hayes watched everything from her private room. The journalist, accustomed to creating viral moments, is now seen at the center of the storm, but not the way she expected. And that was just the beginning. The effect of Carrie Underwood's interview was immediate and overwhelming. Behind the scenes, his team watched the numbers soak in real time. With each update, the videos accumulated millions of views, and the comments were a flood of support. In less than an hour, the excerpt from Carrie's answer was already among the 5 most watched videos of the day on YouTube. At TikTok, influencers recreated the scene, capturing it as a class of posture and emotional intelligence. In morning TV shows, experts discussed what happened. Carrie Underwood was placed against the wall and responded with class and firmness. "This is rare to see today," commented an anchor of one of the largest newspapers in the country. "What impresses is not just what she said, but as he said, without screaming, without attacking, just reaffirming his position respectfully," added another commentator. But while Carrie was praised, Melanie Hayes faced a completely different storm. Sitting in his dressing room, Melanie watched the interview clips on her cell phone, her fingers squeezing the cold cup of coffee. She didn't expect this reaction. His program was known for putting guests in uncomfortable situations, but this time the spell seemed to have turned against the witch. His most faithful fans tried to defend her online, but the narrative was already out of control. The public clearly saw their attempt to ambush and the way Carrie had gone over. She needed to react fast. In an attempt to reverse the situation, Melanie decided to make a post on Twitter. "Interviews are done to challenge and question. My job is to raise important discussions, not only agree with everything. Respect Carrie Underwood, but my question remains valid. Should certain values not evolve?" The post had thousands of likes, but also generated even more debate. Some people supported her, but most saw it as an attempt to justify themselves. "Melanie, your question was not a debate, it was a trap, and Carrie just didn't fall on her. You tried to overthrow someone and ended up exposed. Learn from that. The problem is not to question, it is the intention behind the question." The pressure on Melanie increased. In their own studios, producers argued whether they should address the subject in the next program or simply let the dust download. But the fact was, Carrie had won that clash. Meanwhile, Carrie Underwood spent the day in the studio, recording new tracks for her next album. Her cell phone was crowded with notifications, but she chose not to be carried away by the euphoria of the moment. She knew she could explore the situation, give interviews on the subject, or even delve into the controversy. But that was not your style. In the late afternoon, Carrie made a single post on her social networks. A photo of her in the studio next to her team, with the caption, "Truth always finds a way, thank you all for the affection. Now, back to what really matters. Music. It was enough for your fans to go crazy." Unlike Melanie, who tried to maintain control of the narrative, Carrie showed that she did not need to insist on the subject to prove her point, and that only increased the public's respect for her. In the following days, the repercussion did not decrease. TV channels, radios, and podcasts debated the posture of the two women. Even great celebrities have entered the discussion. "The way Carrie led that was brilliant," said a famous actor in an interview. "She proved that integrity is stronger than any controversy manufactured." Brands began to notice the impact. Companies that already worked with Carrie intensified their support, and new contracts began to emerge. Everyone wanted to associate their image with an artist who kept firm without disrespecting anyone. Meanwhile, Melanie's team struggled to clean their image. The program sponsors began to question their aggressive approach, and some even considered removing support. The presenter, feeling the weight of the consequences, decided to give an interview to try to soften the damage. However, as much as he tried to justify his intentions, it was clear that his plan had failed. The audience had already chosen its side. A week later, Carrie Underwood took the stage for an exhausted show. When he took the microphone and looked at the crowd, the audience's roar was deafening. She smiled and said, "You know, in recent days, I learned something important. When you keep you true to who you are, the world can try to test you, but in the end, the truth always wins." The crowd exploded in applause. At that moment, it was clear the interview that started as a trap had become a milestone, and Carrie Underwood, with her serenity and authenticity, had turned a confrontation into a triumph. And Melanie Hayes, well, that night would change your career forever. In the days following the interview, the repercussion was still high. Carrie Underwood followed her routine normally, refusing to be sucked by the frenzy of social networks. Meanwhile, Melanie Hayes' team tried to contain the crisis that was settled. The presenter, once confident of her strategy, now saw her questioned credibility. The audience of the program plummeted in the following episodes. The previously faithful public seemed less interested in their incisive interviews. The sponsors began to press the station, and the production team considered a reformulation to soften the tone of the talk show. Melanie, aware of the negative impact, decided to adopt a new approach. In a special episode, she opened the show with a milder tone and a carefully rehearsed speech. "In recent weeks, my interview with Carrie Underwood has generated a big debate. I want to make it clear that I've always sought to provoke relevant discussions, but I recognize that at times I may have been misunderstood. My respect for Carrie continues, and I hope this conversation he served for something greater. We learned to listen to each other with more empathy." It was an obvious attempt to soften the situation without completely admitting its mistake. Some viewers accepted their explanation, but many saw it only as a desperate effort to recover the reputation. Meanwhile, Carrie received support messages from colleagues from the industry, fans, and even strangers who identified with her posture. The impact of your answer was beyond entertainment. In future interviews, journalists asked about what happened, but she always responded elegantly, without feeding controversy. "I believe we need to learn to disagree without disrespecting. Everyone has the right to think differently, and this should not be a reason for hasty attacks or judgments. What matters is how we choose to deal with these differences." The phrase was widely shared and became a symbol of what the interview represented. In addition, Carrie decided to use the attention received for something positive. He announced that part of the profits of his next tour would be intended for institutions that promote respectful dialogue and freedom of expression without hostility. The decision was seen as a powerful gesture. It was not just a response to what happened, but a clear message about the values it defended. In the following months, the subject was losing strength, but the impression left by Carrie remained. Melanie Hayes, on the other hand, saw her career to take an unexpected course. His talk show was reformulations, and his image was never the same. Although she has been able to keep her space on television, she learned in the worst way that sometimes the audience does not forget so easy when someone tries to manipulate a situation to generate audience. Carrie, on the other hand, continued to grow. His next album was an absolute success. His tours broke records, and his fan base strengthened himself even more. She proved that integrity and authenticity always speak louder, and in the end, that interview that began as an ambush turned out to be one of the most iconic moments of his career. Months after the interview, Carrie Underwood's life continued to follow her natural course. His tour was on the rise, with tickets sold out in all cities. Each show was a show, and the public's energy seemed more intense than ever. Something had changed. The episode on Melanie Hayes' talk show not only reinforced the admiration of her fans, but also won the respect of many people who once did not follow her career. Behind the scenes, Carrie's team clearly saw the impact of the moment. The demand for its official products increased, his music was more present in the charts, and above all, there was a new level of engagement on his social networks. People shared personal stories of moments when they had to stay firm in the face of adversity, using Carrie as inspiration. For her, that was the true meaning of success. Despite the intense routine, Carrie couldn't help but notice how the incident with Melanie Hayes continued to generate media repercussions. His name was still mentioned in articles, debates, and even other television programs. The episode had become a case study on how to maintain composure in the face of hostile situations. Melanie faced a very different reality. His audience was never the same, and invitations for interviews with great personalities began to decrease. The public seemed to be suspicious of his approach, and many guests began to avoid their program. Gradually, its influence was weakening, and the station had to rethink the format of the talk show. One day, while reviewing his schedule, Carrie received an unexpected proposal. One of the largest television programs in the country wanted her to participate in a special interview to talk about the impact of her response and the importance of respect on public discussions. At first, she hesitated. "I didn't want to be remembered just for that moment, but for your music and your work." However, by reflecting on the opportunity, he realized that he could use that platform for something larger. When the day of the interview arrived, Carrie entered the studio with the same serenity that characterized her. The presenter, unlike Melanie, received her with a respectful tone, making it clear that the intention was to discuss the topic constructively. "Carrie, your answer that night became iconic. Did you expect you to have this impact?" She smiled thoughtfully. "To be honest, no. I was just sincere. I think people connected because they saw something rare today, a conversation in which no one needed to attack the other to defend their point of view." The public applauded, and the presenter continued. "Many say their posture inspired others to position themselves more confidently. Do you feel this responsibility?" Carrie paused before answering. "I believe we all have a responsibility on how we express ourselves. We can choose to respond angrily or with respect. I choose respect because I believe this is how real changes happen." The studio went silent for a few seconds, as if her words needed a moment to settle down. Then the audience started to applaud again, this time with even more enthusiasm. That night, Carrie Underwood once again proved that real strength is not talking louder, but in speaking with purpose. The interview reinforced his image as an entire artist, someone who was not shaken by external pressures. Meanwhile, Melanie Hayes watched everything from home. His name was no longer the center of attention, and the narrative had completely fled from his control. For the first time in years, she wondered if it was time to change her approach. But regardless of what she did next, one thing was certain: that night with Carrie Underwood would never be forgotten. Time has passed, but the night of the interview continued to be remembered as one of the most striking moments on television. For Carrie Underwood, however, life followed her natural course. His music continued to play hearts, his career flourished, and his impact went beyond the songs. He was in the way he inspired people to stay loyal to themselves. In one of her crowded shows, before singing the last song of the night, she stopped for a moment, looked at the crowd and said, "If there's something I learned, we don't have to scream to be heard. The truth, when you say with the heart, finds your own way." The audience responded with deafening applause. At that moment, it was clear the interview was just a chapter. Carrie Underwood's story was still being written, and she would count on the same authenticity as always. If this story has touched your heart, reserve a moment to reflect on your own faith and share it with someone who may need it today. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire, challenge, and approach us.